So a caller calls in to the Dave Ramsey show, and the person says this to Dave Ramsey. You recommend people do not put into their 401ks to pay off debt. My husband believes in maxing out his 401k. How do I talk to him in an honoring way? And what do you recommend? Pay off the debt, or do I fully fund my 401k? Right? That's the question. So in typical Dave fashion, he boils it down to black and white facts.
Quote unquote facts.
And he says, you can't do two things at once.
That's one of the things.
The data shows that those who get wealthy enough to care for themselves, help their children, and be outrageously generous are people who aggressively pay off their debt before investing in their 401k. So he's saying you can do either one or the other, but if you don't pay off your debt, you're not going to be able to do all those other things. While we agree that you want to carefully consider paying off debt versus maxing your 401k, because it's really bananas to pay 29% interest on a card while you gamble it in your 401k, and it possibly could go down 20% or up 7%, or as he likes to say, it's 8%. And really, we call his bluff on the rust, right? But not in the way that you'd expect. So I want you to keep listening for our historical perspective on what we think the real problem with 401ks are, whether you have debt or not, that there's fundamentally a lot of other problems that we need to be thinking about.
Hello, and welcome to the Wealth Wisdom Financial Podcast. We believe when conventional financial thinking doesn't get you where you want to go, you need wealth wisdom. Please hit that subscribe button, and if you're watching on YouTube, give us a like and comment below. Now, that was quite a setup at the beginning, Brandon. Thanks for recapping this Ramsey show for us.
Yeah, love watching those Ramsey videos.
No. We did watch one of the videos, and in that same video, Dave gives this lady permission to take her own path. He's very adamant to make a point of saying that the Ramsey people are not a cult, that she can leave his path anytime she wants. So, you Ramsey fans who are listening right now, here's your chance to question whether you should max out your 401k, put in only enough to get the employer match, throw it in a dumpster fire, or find your own path.
Yeah. To each their own path, but to really choose your path, we believe you should hear some historic wealth wisdom that goes well beyond that conventional thinking, right? Now, Amanda, you learned a lot about 401ks in your studies to become a certified financial planning professional. So open this up. You learned a lot. What's the history of the 401k?
Let's get in the Wayback Machine and
traveling again.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Did you know the 401k is not even old enough to retire itself? And it was accidentally created. We have to go back to the Revenue Act of 1978. Yes, Congress accidentally put in that Revenue Act of 1978 a section into the Internal Revenue Service Code that allowed for tax deferral of deferred compensation. But in 1980, this man named Ted Benna was one of the first to establish the 401k with his employer after their consulting firm had actually proposed starting a 401k with a client, and the client had rejected doing it themselves because no one had ever done it before. So Ted convinced his employer to do it, and thus became known as the father of the 401k. After they did it, they convinced a lot of other businesses to do it this as well.
So he intentionally used that in an unintentional thing.
Yes. And here's a quote from a MarketWatch article published in 2016 that tells a lot of this history. Though Benna wasn't the only one to see the potential in Section 401k, there were far more naysayers at the time. Even with preliminary approval from the IRS, full regulations weren't written for another decade. Many of the big consulting firms still came out and said it was all a scam.
What, they called 401ks a scam?
Yeah.
Wow.
And in fact, the original purpose of the Section 401k was simply to limit the use of executive cash deferred plans. Now, since that time in 1980, Ted Bennett and others like him have gotten very rich off of transitioning employers from pensions to 401ks, helping new businesses implement their 401ks, and of course, administering the 401ks for all of these people, all these businesses. Fast forward to 2011, and we see Ted Bennett go on record calling the 401k a quote-unquote monster that should be blown up. Ted Bennett's words, not ours.
Well, that is powerful, Amanda. I mean, just thinking about the history, unintended consequences, and the person who created it saying, I wish I didn't create this and it should have been blown up, right? But why such a change of heart for Ted Bennett? Is it because 401ks have become so overcomplicated and fraught with fees? Could that be it? Maybe. I mean, he made some money off of it, so he might know that. Is it because 401ks could be repealed by the government at any time?
Maybe even accidentally?
Yeah, accidentally. Oops. I don't know how that worked, but it happened. Is it because most of the investment options within a 401k leave participants subject to a 40% decrease or more the next stock or bond market crash that happens, right? It could happen, and it has happened in the past, right? A couple times. Maybe it's a little of all three of those: complexity and fees and government dependence and investment options that maybe cost too much or go down when we don't want it to.
Yes, Brandon, those. And I would add my personal three biggest objections to the 401k. Number one, lack of liquidity. Perhaps you take a loan when you really need it from your 401k. Perhaps that's an option. But then you're subject to strict repayment schedules, and the interest that you pay is taxed twice. Some people depend on hardship withdrawals, but those are way harder to get than most people realize.
Yeah.
And some think, well, even if I work into my 70s, I could still start using the money when I'm 59 and a half, even if I'm at my current employer. But it can be very difficult, if not impossible, to access your own money while you're still at your employer, regardless of your age. We've seen that time and time again.
Well, and they did do, when 2020 happened, they did give a way where you could access 100,000 because people didn't have liquidity.
Right.
And they needed that for an emergency, which happened to be a giant pandemic.
Right. But they also increased their tax revenue by allowing that to happen because you could take it out, but you also had to pay the taxes on it.
Yeah.
Okay. So which brings us to number two, tax deferral. This stems from the lie that a lot of people have come to believe that taxes are always lower in retirement. Sure, you might not have FICA taxes, but many also have lost their most important tax deductions by then. Your children are too old to be a tax deduction anymore. You maybe have lower mortgage interest. You've lost some business deductions. All the kinds of things that help you save on taxes are gone, including the ability to contribute to a 401k if you don't have earned income. Tax-free is also, like, if you're able to build a tax-free income, it can also be very important when it comes to the taxation of Social Security, how much you pay for Medicare. What a lot of people don't realize is the money coming out of their 401k is now taxable income and can impact those other parts of their financial lives at that point too.
And on top of this is just something that blows my mind. When you're using a 401k, not only do you invest the IRS's money for them and pay taxes on all the growth that you're getting at ordinary income rates, but you also pay the fees on the IRS's portion as well. So you're being charged, think about it, you're being charged a fee on all of that money, and they are getting it without fees.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome for them.
Finally, my third biggest objection to 401ks and something to consider is that 401ks actually allow your employer to continue and to increase the pay gap between the highly compensated employees and the rank and file employees. Now, if your employer gives a generous 3% match and you make $50,000, you got to think about that. Your match is way less than the upper management making much more than you.
Yep.
There are, of course, limits on how high you can go. In 2023, the limit is $66,000 for combined employee and employer matching. We'll let you do the math to figure out how much more of a matching contribution your boss gets compared to you. But to let you know, your boss might not be getting a 3% match. There are these non-discrimination tests called the ADP and the ACP tests. Go Google that if you want, if you're a nerd like us. These are supposed to make sure your employer contributes for all employees. They're called non-discrimination tests, but they don't require the same contribution for all employees, only a minimum. So if you're a janitor or a secretary, a rank and file employee, you might get a 3% match, but your employer then is able to match highly compensated employees at 5%, as long as they just stay under the max total.
But here's the thing. I mean, I know how you think as far as the match and all that stuff, but it's free money, right, Amanda? Like, that's what people tell me all the time. I mean, it's free money.
Well, you have to ask, if we did not have the 401k, if it had never been in existence and throughout, since 1978 through today, what if that had never happened? You have to think about, we might still all have pensions. Would we prefer that? If these were originally called salary reduction plans. That's what they're called, salary reduction plans.
Oh,
so would our salaries actually be higher if we didn't have 401ks? When would you prefer that? And then finally, if you are counting on the vesting, you have to remember the match often comes with a vesting schedule. And with as often as people move jobs these days, a lot of people don't ever get to keep that match or 100% of that match. They might lose some of it when they move to their next job.
Which makes me think, again, I didn't even know about that salary reduction plan.
That's what they were doing.
And going back to...
They got cleverer with marketing and naming. Yeah.
They changed it, which I would too. Because who's going to sign up for a salary reduction
Exactly.
plan? Nobody.
Yeah.
But that does lead me to ask about this Dave Ramsey thing. Is paying off debt versus joining a salary reduction plan, which way do I want to go?
And here's where we have our biggest beef, is that it's not so black and white. It's not so cut and dry. You need to carefully evaluate whether you want to max out your 401k, contribute enough to get the match, stop 401k contributions altogether, aggressively pay off debt, make sure you have an adequate emergency fund. How much should that really be instead of a blanket amount for everyone? You have to carefully consider things like your liquidity needs, your unique tax situation, whether you want to further an unequal system. Choose your own path and don't just follow what's become conventional because a bunch of men in the 1980s found a new way to make money and were really clever at marketing.
The other thing is that if you're young too, like starting and putting that money in for 30 years
or more.
And, again, maybe it's going to be great, but I don't know if we're going to have more recessions, less. I don't know. But for locking that money up for that long period of time, I don't know if that's a good idea sometimes. We want to help you learn more about how we work with individuals and couples all across America to carefully weigh their options for retirement, savings, and investing. So go to wealthwisdomfp.com and schedule a discovery call with us to talk about it. It is a complex issue. Do I do this? How do I build the foundation, which we talk about foundational wealth all the time? How do I build that so then we can do the things and live the freedom and life that we want, right?
Yeah, and if you are not an employee, you're an employer, or if you're like Ted Bunna and you work in HR or you work in some kind of consulting and you're trying to explore ways to equitably attract, retain, and reward your employees or employees of a firm that you work with, we'd love to help you look into what are some of the alternatives that businesses could do to start moving away from the 401k and to more equitable options. You can schedule that discovery call at our website, wealthwisdomfp.com, and we'll help you start to explore some of the options that have been around for hundreds of years. Just the 401k has just been more popular than them.
Rebranding.
Right. So thanks for joining us. Hit that subscribe button, because next time and the following time, we're going to talk about two really important alternatives to the 401k we think more people need to know about. And while you're waiting for those next episodes, may you live long and profit. The topics presented in this podcast are for general information only and not for the purposes of providing legal, accounting, or investment advice. On such matters, please consult a professional who knows your specific situation.